All right, I'm gonna be talking about Kwaidan from 1964. This is a Japanese film directed by Masaki Kobayashi. He's a famous director in Japan, came out in the 50s. Interestingly enough, this was his first movie in color. He did a few more before this in black and white. It was actually nominated for a Foreign Language Film Academy Award nomination. It was also premiered at Cannes Film Festival. It just got a Criterion Collection treatment in 2015, which is the copy I picked up. The way the director wanted it to be presented was in this format, and I was quick to get it when it came out in 2015 just because I've heard so much about it. Read some lists online about how creepy this movie is and how great the cinematography is, and pretty much everything up my alley that I love in films, and the fact that it's also a ghost story. I absolutely loved this film. Kinda is a period piece, feudal Japan kind of vibes. You get a lot of the great costuming and the settings from this era. And it also has a twist to it as well, of course, with the ghost stories. And these ghost stories are adapted from an early 20th century author, Lafcadio Hearn. And these were actually handpicked stories by Kobayashi, the director, and they're all unrelated to each other. You get the vibe, at least, that when I watched it, that he picked these stories because they had the most promising visual appeal, like something that would adapt well to film. The movie starts in a really artsy way right from the get-go. With the opening title cards, it looks as if there's ink dye being dropped into water. I don't know how they accomplished this, but it's a really unique shot. That mixed with weird sound effects, it gives you an unnerving feeling. So even though the stories are sort of disconnected, I think one thing you could say that's in common about all of them is that each one deals with a character having struggles of some sort, and that manifests into something supernatural. What I also like about each story is they're not a standard format. It's not like, here's the character with a voiceover narrative, and then that's how the next story goes. They all kind of approach the story in a different way. In the third story, there's an excellent scene that opens up, and it's a story told of a famous battle from the past between two clans. And it's on the ocean and they're on boats. There's no sound effects. When swords clash, you don't hear them. And it's really unique. Most of the time in these stories, you kind of know what's going on. You can easily guess. They're not trying to throw these unique twists at you. I think it's more about style and substance than trying to really throw you off as a viewer in terms of understanding the story. In the last story, you have a number of questions after you watch it, whether or not the character was really hallucinating on his own, or maybe some of the demons from his past were coming back. He appeared to be some sort of warrior at one time, so maybe these are ghosts that are coming back, people that he had killed. Maybe he's been through so many battles that these are just some of them trying to come back to haunt him. One thing I really like about the sound effects as well, either they're sometimes not there, as I mentioned before, or they're off. Like, for example, there's a character in the first story, he goes back to visit his wife that he had left. He's just apologizes to her for leaving her, and all these strange things start happening, and he gets a little freaked out. So he starts stumbling and hits the ground. But you hear the sound of him falling on the wood like 3 seconds later. And then sometimes he'll fall on something and break it. You don't hear that sound, but then there's another sound effect that happens. But they're all sounds that actually are happening on the set, but they decided to put them in different areas. And it really makes for this unique nightmarish scene too. There's a part where there's a character even that's trying to run, but in slow motion. And some of you may be able to relate to this, but when you have a nightmare and you're trying to run and everything's kind of slow and sluggish, they capture that in one of the stories, and I just thought they did it so great visually. The number one thing I was totally impressed by this movie was the sets and the set design. Most of this was filmed actually indoors, and there was Japanese sound stages at the time that weren't big enough for the vision that the director wanted. So they ended up using actual airplane hangars to build these large sets. There are scenes that they have to be in a forest, but it's indoors, and there's snow everywhere too, and you can just tell they're probably blasting fans to blow the snow everywhere. The one giveaway that they are actually in a soundstage environment though is the horizon and the wall. They're trying to make it appear that it's really far away, but it's actually clearly painted, hand painted or something. And it kind of threw me off and took me out of the moment for a little bit, but I didn't really have too much of an issue with it. They're fantastical stories, and there's also large bodies of water. some of these scenes take place too. So that really impressed me, the fact that they were able to get all of this together, the crew, the amount of crew that had to go into putting that all together. It's really fascinating. So yes, this movie was created in the 60s, and with the experimentation of the different types of editing techniques and filming, there are some laughable moments. One example of the attempts for the special effects is there's one character who is actually trying to be hidden from a ghost. I know that sounds weird, but they are being visited constantly by a ghost. So they use this sutras, like special calligraphy, to draw on their bodies. And supposedly you're invisible to a ghost. So when they approach you, you can't be seen. But there's one key element to that he missed, and is the fact that he didn't get his ears. He didn't draw the calligraphy on his ears. So, as you probably can guess by now, the ghost actually saw only his ears. And if that sounds totally confusing to you, that's why you need to go see the movie, so it makes a little bit more sense. As from what I understand too, this movie was already in the hole in terms of budget when it started, so they were already having budget issues. But I really appreciated and respected what they were going for. They did a lot, when they were trying to do a ghost, they're trying to make them transparent, for example. You can see that it's sort of a little jump cut, and they try to dissolve them away, and they do all these really unique things. But it's great though. It's forward thinking, and I think that kind of helped lay the groundwork for future movies of that style. One of the crew from the movie mentioned that the director was very hands-off with the editing approach, but then would come back and tell the editor after something was complete to change a little bit of things here and there. But for the most part, there was creative culmination between the musicians, the editing, all the different departments that put their efforts into this movie being created was really unique, and also has been described as something that really, it would be hard to recreate. And it could probably be duplicated, but there's something about all these creative minds coming together and knowing a little bit about the behind the scenes of the movie. It's really fascinating how they put this all together. And there's one thing to be said about the sound design in this movie and the soundtrack. It has a traditional Japanese style of music, but it also in a very kind of fast-paced and sort of unnatural beats, and it puts you on the edge of your seat a little bit with the visuals. There's also a lot of camera techniques used throughout the movie that kind of throw you off. There's a lot of, I've mentioned this in prior episodes, but with the Dutch tilt, that was actually pretty prominent in this movie too. One character having visions of someone there when they're not there, and they appear to be kind of sick, and that camera's sort of doing that motion like this. The camera's working with the story most of the time, and it really throws you off as a viewer. The story of ghosts in general is universally frightening, and I think this movie captures that aspect really well in presenting that in this type of format and this style. It's a very stylistic movie. Every scene you can tell is methodical, planned out. Framing wise, the cinematography is excellent. It puts you in an environment that's in this old feudal Japan setting with the characters, and there's great acting throughout. That's why I think it was so widely recognized, is because of those two things mixed together. You have ghosts mixed with a stylistic aspect and very bright, lush colors, and people were really receptive to that sort of style of filmmaking even back then. I recommend you check out Kwaidan. You can find it on YouTube. You do have to pay to watch it, but I found the Criterion Collection at a pretty good deal. So if you really want to delve into this movie, I recommend you do. It's one of those great movies you just kick back, watch, and really absorb all the great detail. So check it out and let me know what you think.